All right, now we got a fresh recording. Got rid of all the me going crazy there.
It's recording now on my screen.
Uh-huh. Okay, we found our page. Posting as. Next. Preparing live streaming preview. All right, it's loading. All I had to do is take a hit off the vape pen. Everything started working after that. Notice that?
What?
I said all I had to do was take a hit off my vape pen and everything started working. It's loading.
Oh,
We should be going live in a minute.
is the weather good? Is the weather good in Virginia?
Hey, it's gorgeous here. It's beautiful, sunny morning. We had storms all night though. All right, I got a video popped up on my screen here. Wow, all right. Title required. Veterans Voices #1 episode. I've typed this in about 11 times now. Audience settings, gaming. I'm published as a. I'm just going for it. We're just gonna, if I can see how to. It's, oh, I say, it wants me to say something about this live video. I said, this is our first episode live on Facebook. Please excuse the technical difficulties. And I'm saying go live. All right, it looks like we're going live. Setting up your meeting on Facebook Live.
It says here that it is now streaming live on Facebook.
All right, I think we've made it to the internet, Al. 10:24 a.m.
Yeah, I think we did, man. It's
24 minutes late. But we made it nonetheless. I think we're now live on Facebook.
24 minutes.
If I can find the Facebook event page now, let me see if I can pull that up at the same time. I'm not sure if I can see the messages. I think for today, we're not going to do messages because I don't even see where to see the messages online. And I have to go to a different screen. So at this point in the learning curve, we're just going to talk and hope the world can hear us. Let's introduce ourselves. So I am Michael Krawitz. I'm Executive Director of Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access. And with any luck, we're live on Facebook with our what we're calling our baseline episode, Veterans Voices #1. We've been doing the Veterans Voices podcast for many years with Casper Leach on Time for Hemp and the Hemp Radio Network. Our best wishes and much love to Casper out there in the wild world of COVID. And I hope you're doing okay. We have done, what have we done? Probably about 15, 20 podcasts on the Veterans Voices platform. They can be found on YouTube and on Spreaker and iCloud and what's the big one there? I forget the huge one. Memory's not what it used to be. So anyway, you find those. You find those episodes out there on the web. The Veterans Voices podcast for us, the idea of it is to allow military veterans, especially those working in the cannabis space, cannabis stakeholders, and those working on a cannabis activism, but working with veterans across the board to allow them the space and the opportunity to really have an open platform. Oftentimes, we've noticed in the media over the years that you get 30 seconds, a minute or 2 minutes sound bite. You don't get much time to really state your case. So Al and I tried to give an open forum, where we give a fair amount of time, as much time as you need, basically, to state your case. And over the years, we've had some great vets. So I do encourage people to go out there and look at what we've done before. I wanted today to start at the beginning a little bit. So, what I want to do, Al, if I could, I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself. And what I want to do is start out with literally what got us going, in activism. Where I would like to get your brain going, where I think would be most interesting is, I remember, Al Byrne, for those who don't know, he's a co-director and part of the leadership team of Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access. And Al's been one of my mentors, co-founder of Patients at a Time, which was was a pilot organization working to bring accredited, everybody's talking about education, handing out flyers and educating people and stuff like that, and distributing information. But this is a higher bar to actually create college courses where you get continuing medical education and college credit for learning about cannabis. That was something new and different. And it was a strong reaction from the drug warriors, from the drug czar. I remember early on, they didn't like the idea. But I want to bring your mind back to that, because I know that, folks have no idea where that came from, how that felt back then, compared to today. It's such a different universe. So, what was the impetus of that, and what got you started is kind of what I would point you to. But anyway, handing the mic over to you, Al. Say hello.
Well, thank you. My name's Al Byrne. Mike is in Virginia right now. I'm in Florida. I have been a Virginia resident for about 35 years. My story starts really with cannabis, with the death of my father from liver cancer back in 1967. And I'll keep this short, but when he was diagnosed with cancer, he was an anti-cannabis guy. His doctor, however, a guy that he had graduated from Boston College with, and the doc, of course, went on to medical school. And the doc graduated from medical school in 1936. And in those days, in U.S. medical schools, doctors, nurses, et cetera, were taught about the therapeutic value of cannabis. So my dad's doc and his friend knew this. And so I went to the doctor one day. I was in the Navy. I was a Lieutenant JG. I was actually stationed on a destroyer in Virginia, but the ship let me go every couple of weeks to go visit my dad. I went up and I saw the doc, and my dad had gone and lost about 80 pounds through chemotherapy treatment, which is grim now, but it was awful back in the 60s. He wouldn't quit, my dad. Anyway, I asked this doc if there was something we could do for the nausea, and all, and he said, yeah, see if you could get your dad some marijuana, he called it, and see if he'll smoke it. My dad had been a smoker in his younger days, but again, anti-cannabis. Anyway, I convinced him to take a couple of hits on a crudely rolled joint that I made, and within a couple of minutes, he had stopped feeling nauseous, actually ate food that I prepared for him. It was extraordinary. And then he died. And then life moves on. I stayed in the Navy. I met my future wife in the Navy, Marilyn Mathry, a Navy nurse. And one of my duty stations in the state of Washington took us to Whidbey Island. Marilyn got a job at the hospital there, and by happenstance, a patient came in who was a research patient at the University of Washington Hospital, was treated out at Island Hospital. And his experimental treatment was cannabis. Marilyn was the RN assigned to him, and she saw remarkable improvement in this man's life and condition using cannabis. We moved on. Marilyn went to get her master's degree in science of nursing at Case Western University in Cleveland, which was my last duty stop. And her thesis had to do with the disclosure of cannabis use to healthcare professionals, a question that really had never been asked in academia before. We got the help of NORML, specifically at the time now deceased Kevin Zeese and John Getman, to help us with a survey because NORML had a bunch of people who were pro cannabis. 5,000 flyers were sent out. We got back an astounding return rate, 80%, something like that. And I'll tell you what, Marilyn and I sat there in the basement of Case Western's research building, and we were astonished. Back in those days, cannabis was known as marijuana, and it was known for two uses: an antiemetic, like my father had used. In other words, it helps you not throw up, and also as a pain control, as well as a treatment for glaucoma. That was it. Nobody knew anything else. Well, these people wrote back on this flyer, hundreds of them. And the people were in age roughly from about 15 to 75. Some were unemployed. Some made $500,000 a year. There were men and women. It was quite a mix. And the stuff that they wrote down was interesting. Marilyn asked standard questions. They answered the standard questions. And the standard questions indicated that most of the people would talk to their healthcare professionals about the use of cannabis. What astounded us, it was an epiphany, was what they wrote down. I use it for morning sickness. I use it for sickle cell. I use it for Crohn's disease. I use it for chronic pain. I use it for migraines. I use it for, and on and on and on. And that was the beginning of the ball for us, the two of us, as we just sat there and we said, we know something that the world doesn't know now, and we got to tell the world. We both joined NORML, National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. I started out as a financial consultant to them. I ended up on their board of directors, and then for several years, I was basically the COO, CEO with Jim Turney. We ran the place. We turned it from a struggling, almost dead organization to something that was functional. And here the story really began. Marilyn and I had this background with the medical aspect, and in the door one day comes Jack Herr. Now, I don't know if anybody knows Jack Herr, but if they don't, they should. This guy single-handedly reintroduced hemp to the United States. By knowledge, by his untiring, unselfish, never relenting work to bring hemp back into our society. So if you're out there and you're a hempster, you can look up Jack Herr, Herrer. He's worth knowing about. He's a great man. He is deceased. I'd like to point out, as long as we're on this show, I want to point something out now. I'll just digress just a bit. Mike is a retired Air Force veteran. I'm a retired Navy veteran. Jack Herr was in the Army. And you're going to hear a lot of names here that we're going to mention, and an incredible number of these leaders, these wonderful people, were veterans. I just told you my wife's a veteran. So anyway, Jack comes in, and I got to tell you this story because he had with him. He wanted to make a presentation to the board, 5 or 10 minutes. Of course, we said, "Yeah, come on in, Jack." Anyway, he came in with the ugliest sport coat I've ever seen in my life. It looked like that Joseph coat of colors or something, and it was baggy, and it was just ugly. But he came in on this thing, and he's so excited, and he's talking about hemp. And at the time, somebody in the past at NORML had actually, copyrighted the word hemp, H period, E period, M period, P period. And Jack wanted that, and we gave it to him. And that began Jack. So right then at NORML, this was like 1989, 90, all of a sudden, I sat there with Jim Turney, and we said to each other, you know, this will complicate their lives, meaning the drug warriors, because we were a legalization effort. Okay, good. But now we could have this other diversion. From a military point of view, it made perfect sense. Make them split their forces. Let Jack take the hemp thing and let him go fight Jack over there, but we'll stay here and fight this. And then I sat there one day and I said, hell, why not go 3 ways? Why not do the medical too? Why not really screw them up? And that was the beginning of the end, really, for the drug war. I think right there, that those decisions to split everything up 3 ways absolutely complicated the government's world, which was just what I wanted to do. And so in 1990, NORML did something really weird. We had a conference, a legalization outfit, but the conference was basically centered on the medical use of cannabis. We invited the 5 legal patients at the time to speak. You may not know this, but there's a program in the government called the IND program, Investigational New Drug Program. And under that program, a certain number of doctors in the country and their patients were sent free cannabis from the University of Mississippi, where it was grown from the government, to these patients, and they used it. Now, the stuff was terrible. It contained sticks and seeds, and some of it was 8, 10 years old, but it worked. These patients had success with their diseases. The 5 were led by Bob Randall. Patient number 1. Bob was the first patient in America to get federal cannabis legally. He was a wonderful man, absolutely eloquent in his ability to vocalize what was in his life and the other patients' lives. The other patients were all, Americans. They were men and women. They were well-dressed. George and Irv sat there in coats and ties, and the ladies had on dresses, and they were dignified, middle-aged people that expressed themselves and their happiness with cannabis very well, and then asked for the same kind of treatment for others. It was a wonderful, moving moment in history for a conference. NORML at the time would get about 400 calls a week, mainly from people who were busted. They want to know if they could help them find a lawyer in Kansas or someplace. And after that conference that week, we got 40,000 calls, 40,000. We tried to answer them all. And I'll tell you, they came in from ordinary people, and they came in from Hollywood stars who offered us their help, and we took it. And NORML, from that point, is where it is today. It survived, it did better, and is still doing good work, and I applaud the legalization effort that is continuing. But at the time, Marilyn and I said, well, this is amazing. This medical cannabis thing has legs. So we formed patients at a time, like Mike said, a few years later. We used the 5 patients as original board members, and we formed a national nonprofit, Patients Out of Time. I point out again and again, there's any number of organizations in the cannabis world that have been formed in those times, but the only one that's ever been formed with patients as the first word was us, because that was our concern, the patients. And the fact that patients we knew were out of time, they're dying. And if we could halt that, arrest that by any means necessary, we would. We formed, as Mike said, at a very high level. We got the support from wonderful, wonderful doctors and nurses, Donald Abrams, Melanie Dreyer. All these people were on our team, and we held our first conference in the year 2000. Mike was there. Mike handled all the questions that were flowing in from around the country, but it was at the University of Iowa, Iowa City, Iowa. The sponsors were the University of Iowa's Medical School and Nursing School, therefore accredited. And it was a great success. We actually videoed the entire conference to 7 remote locations. One was McGill University in Canada, University of Virginia, all over the country. And that helped spread the word. And from those exposures, we got more volunteers. Mark Ware came down to join us from Canada, a wonderful doctor. So we snuck that by the federal government. They didn't see that one coming. And then it got harder. But over the years, we pressed on, and Patients at a Time did its job. Our job was a growth up pyramid, the point being on the bottom. That was the Patients at a Time, and we just wanted to expand our knowledge. We gave it away, we taped everything, we put it on YouTube. There's been hundreds of thousands of hits on those talks over the years, and the word has spread. And we're proud of that because now it's called cannabis. Now people have been able to get it. There are 27 countries in the world now that have cannabis in their pharmacopoeia. So that part of it is done. Now this is a veterans show. How does that apply to veterans? Well, Mike called me up one day from his house in Southern Virginia and said, I want to come up and talk to you about some stuff. I said, come on up. So he came up, we sat in my room, my living room, and we formed Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access with the goal, and I'll let Mike tell you how this was done, but the goal here was to get veterans to be allowed to use cannabis as part of their therapeutic protocol. And that is in fact the case. I'll let Mike tell you how. But before we go there, I want to say this to every veteran out there, every human being that's listening to this show, the caregivers, the doctors, and the nurses. If a veteran of the United States military uses cannabis and goes into a VA facility and says that he or she will lose no benefits are lost for the use of cannabis in the United States by a veteran. Now, in some states, that veteran is not allowed to use cannabis and be treated in that facility because that state is so much of a dinosaur mode that it won't go into a legalization for medical cannabis for anybody, let alone veterans. So if you're a veteran, just know this, that you will never lose benefits for cannabis use, regardless of what the situation is. And if you do, you let us know. That will stop real quick. I want to skip here to Mike because this is his story. Mike was unjustly criticized and rebuked by the VA for his use of cannabis. And I'll let you know, Mike, tell him the story.
Happy to. Before I do that, I wanted to, I took a note while you were talking of just kind of a perspective that I think helps people maybe understand something that you were talking about. When you came in at a leadership level of National Normal, and you were looking at, sort of the lay of the land, there were folks that had already been working on medical cannabis, since the mid to late 60s. Dr. Andy Weil, Dr. Mikaria, Dr. Grinspoon were, I think, the first 3 to be published in modern journals on cannabis stuff. And then you had the Fitzhugh Ludlow Library with Michael Aldrich, Michelle Aldrich, and all those guys from the library that were, bringing back these texts, bringing back like Dr. O'Shaughnessy, who is the doctor that essentially brought the knowledge of cannabis as a medicine to the Western world, literally brought it to the United States in the mid 1800s. And it was published in the medical journals here in the mid 1800s. And from that point on, the medical institutions of the United States started chewing on cannabis as a medicine. Really, they kind of perfected their craft by 1920 or so. But all that got wiped out with prohibition. Around 1942, it was all taken out of the pharmacopoeia and the formulary, erased from history, and not taught to doctors anymore. In a way, I've written about this, so I don't want to talk much about it here, but I've got an Anchor article, I forget what year now, in High Times, a cover article that I wrote on the history of veterans' interaction with the cannabis movement. And we've always been there all the way back to the beginning and before, even going back to World War I, veterans coming back and getting prescriptions right from their pharmacy by prescription, with no problem, no problem at all. It was World War II veterans that came back, and their pharmacy shelves had been stripped bare. There were no longer any prescriptions to be had, and there was no longer any cannabis medicines to be found on the shelves of the pharmacies. With the cannabis movement, our modern cannabis movement, which I think a lot of it really was fueled by, again, military veterans bringing duffel bags of weed home from Korea or Vietnam or whatever. That seems to me, I mean, I may be looking at this from a novice or naive point of view in this respect, because I didn't really look into this history that deep. But it seems to me pretty obvious that Dr. McGarria and Dr. Grinspoon and Dr. Weil were all looking at veterans' experiences. That was part, like I said, I haven't interviewed them. I haven't really searched what they wrote about this, but I suspect that this was a big part of what got them going, was the veterans' experience already with cannabis. Certainly, we had the Panama Canal Report, which was a government study on veterans and military people in the 1910s, 1920s, I believe it was. And we had in the 1970s, we had Veterans Affairs studies. And all these are part of the body of evidence that went into the hopper that got these guys started. And I keep talking about these guys, Weil and Grinspoon and McRae, because to my mind, they got us started. We wouldn't have a medical marijuana movement. Dennis Ferrone, another military veteran, would have never would have gotten Prop 215 going without Dr. McGarria. Dr. McGarria was even central to the 1972 campaign, which is the very first initiative, cannabis, legalization effort in the United States. Very first initiative of its kind in the world, as I understand. This was the movement that was there. It was just one strain of the movement, because, you can go back to the founding fathers on hemp and do a whole nother mini history of hemp as well. And you could also do another one, on the culture and on the, how we may have gotten a lot of our culture from the South. It may have come up from the Americas, and the connection of South and Central America to the story of North America's cannabis history is all other facets. But I just wanted to draw this picture of, that's what you came into. That's what you were looking at on your map table, in 1990. When you were trying to figure out what to do next. And this was an unexplored avenue. Medical cannabis was something that existed. It was out there. It already had quite a bit of legs because of Bob Randall and these, patients that you could draw from. And you were, basically taking that from the map table and putting it into play. And I don't know, I like people to understand that this isn't magic. This is, and it's not an individual person's perspective or their, personal, it's really a community effort that has many, many moving parts. And, sometimes they click like a good rock and roll band, sometimes they click together and they really go places. So talking about, sometimes rock and roll band.
Let me jump on you.
Go ahead.
Everything Mike said is absolutely correct. I mean, the guys coming back from Vietnam, they had been exposed to cannabis over there. They came back, they knew it was good for them, they wanted it. Previous veterans had already told us that. All of these gentlemen, Dr. Grinspoon, I read his book when I was in the middle of the Indian Ocean for the Navy for a year with the Seabees, Marijuana Reconsidered. And boy, was that an eye opener. And Lester Grinspoon and I became friends over the years. Todd McArea was on my board of advisors. Michael Aldrich was on our original board of directors. He's still there. The thing that Mike is pointing out is absolutely right. These guys, they really did the hard work. Michael put the history together. Todd put the medical history together. Lester wrote about it because of his own experience with the sickness of his son. And the only thing that we did it normal is we did two things, I guess. We made it public that the patients needed this stuff. Up until that time, it was doctors arguing with doctors about chemicals and validity and how good your study or not. What we did was we put a face on the patient with Bob and the other four. And that's why we got 40,000 calls. We made it personal. We said, these are people that need this stuff. Just like Mike and I are saying, we are veterans and our brothers and sisters need this plan. Everything Mike said was right. Again, yes, one of the leaders, Dennis Perone, a Marine who suffered through Quezon. If you don't know about Quezon, it's one of the worst experiences a Marine could have in Vietnam, was being there. But Dennis came out of there a changed man and a really great leader. He's gone now too. These are people that have set the tone. Right now, it's all about money and CBD and all this bullshit. It was never about that to any of these people. I never heard the word money with cannabis for 30 years. Go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry.
Hey, I think that's a really important point. You asked me to talk a little bit about the emergence of the Veterans Affairs policy, and I took a quick look at the chat, and there's quite a bit of discussion about being mistreated by medical staff, having medications taken away, being threatened by medical staff because you use marijuana as a medicine or because you quote unquote failed a drug test. These are things that shouldn't happen. A doctor that is saying that you violated policy, that's saying that you failed a drug test, that's saying that you can't have prescription access to narcotics because you're a drug user. Each and every one of those statements that I just made is false. They're contradictory to veterans stated, written Veterans Affairs policy. It's a little tricky to navigate the VA as talking to the choir here, I know, but nonetheless, there's a specific way that I've developed over the years working with patients as a patient advocate that really seemed to work. And the first thing was do not argue with the doctor at all. If the doctor says something, just sort of grin and take it in, hopefully have someone there as a witness with you to stand by you as you go to these appointments, take them right into your clinic appointment with you. What do you call that when you're driving and you have a designated driver, right? You got a designated witness for you at the VA. I think that's all important. If you do have a doctor that said something similar to one of the things that I just said, the first thing you want to do is after the clinic appointment, look at your clinic notes and see what exactly has been written, because what the doctor said to you is much less relevant than what the doctor actually wrote in the clinic notes, and respond to what the doctor wrote in the clinic notes. If the doctor wrote something in the clinic notes that's similar to something that I just described, then you take it up with the medical staff of the institution. Write a letter to the chief of staff and the director, or if there's a really good patient advocate, take it up with the patient advocate, which is your conduit to the director's office of the VA hospital facility. This has been a tried and true way. If you run into a staff by slim chance, and I mean slim, that the chief of staff and the director don't whip this back into shape because they actually usually know policy or have access to it, then you bring it to my attention. Then you call Al or me, and we talk to the folks up in Washington, D.C., and they'll get your directorate of your facility whipped up to shape. But anyway, this is how it works. It's a chain of command. You got to follow it within the Veterans Affairs system like you did in the military to kind of get things done. And we also apply need to know. Don't tell anyone anything they don't need to know. But think about that. I mean, you've got medical issues. If you're going to a hospital, you need to do the research yourself and figure out if the cannabis use or any drug use that you have is going to interact in some way with the medications or the treatments that you have at the VA. If it is, then you need to talk to the doctor. They have a need to know. That's where I would put that line. So I've been asked to perform a duty here.
Unzip, not zip.
Oh, unzip. Jeez. On video, you want me to?
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
Gotta come out.
I got a fellow veteran here, my better half, Kimberly, asking me for help. So I actually got in the middle of something. Al wanted me to talk a little bit about this Veterans Affairs policy. And what happened was I came up in the movement, the cannabis movement in Virginia, at a time when it was sort of the birth of a real heavy duty drug policy reform movement, a harm reduction movement at the national level. And I plugged into that and sort of went through training. I went through every training, but a lot of training on just drug policy, and cannabis was always there. Cannabis was always on the table, but it was never really the focus of national drug control policy, national drug policy reform. And I, looking at all this stuff and learning, I mean, it's an eye opener. If you haven't, gone to like a major website of, like the Drug Policy Alliance, or, Washington Office on Latin America, or, some of the bigger organizations, Human Rights Watch, or Amnesty International, or any of these, and looked at drug policy from their perspective, I encourage you to do so. It's an eye opener. But I saw two freight trains essentially that were heading to each other. I had been working grounded in medical cannabis access, and I knew that that was expanding. And I learned from Dr. Mikaria actually that, and he had, I don't know, 10,000 patients already that he'd seen, not that long after Prop 215, because he had been doing it for years already. And most of the patients were some sort of category of pain that they were getting a benefit from cannabis for. And most of those patients were using cannabis with other medications. In other words, they hadn't completely eliminated other pharmaceutical medications that they were taking. In fact, the word augmenting medication, and a medication that gives a benefit that increases the overall benefit and decreases the need for the other medication. It works well together. I think all too often in our cannabis movement, we like to think that cannabis can just replace all opiates. And I like that thought too. It's just not probably the case. And the other side, where they are like, oh, well, sure, either take our opiates or take your marijuana, but you can't have both. Neither one of those perspectives is healthy, productive, or valid based on the evidence. The reality of it is that if you want overall best patient benefit, you give as much access to cannabis as possible, and it will mitigate a lot of the opiate use, a lot less pain pills, a lot less problems. That's for sure. We've seen that. And that leads to, I'm sure, some reduction in overdose death and all. I mean, it's a good trend to use less opiates. However, that other freight train was the drug war that I'd been tuned into up in DC that was increasing in speed and size, and drug testing was sort of their mantra. I mean, they, drug testing on the street for drivers, drug testing in the prisons, drug testing in the schools. I mean, back then, especially in the 90s, my God, they were drug testing happy. And I saw that, sort of hitting that other freight train and making it impossible for patients to use cannabis as an adjunct therapy. You can't use it as an adjunctive, medication to opiates if you're given my way or the highway mandate by drug testing. I decided to fight that whole idea, and actually decided outside of the VA, outside of my veteran, being a veteran or all that, I decided to fight that. But I decided to fight that inside the VA as a strategy. And the reason why I decided was because I came up with a whole bunch of constitutional principles that I thought applied. I mean, you have a right to be secure in your person against search and seizure. You shouldn't have to testify against yourself. Certainly drug testing is testifying against yourself. Certainly it's an intrusion into your privacy and being asked to give access to your most personal space. I mean, how can it be more personal? So, all these constitutional issues that I brought up, being treated equally as others. You have these federal patients that are getting cannabis as a medicine. How could you not be treated equally with that? That's another facet of this. Free speech, that you have the right to free speech. All these things seem to be impinged by the Veteran Affairs position if they implemented that drug testing. Where the drug testing tire met the road was a thing called a pain contract. And it wasn't a contract, just a threat written in a letter that you were told to sign or else. And it spread like a virus on the internet, and doctors were told to use these forms. And it just threatened you in 5 different ways, mostly around marijuana, saying if you use marijuana, you smoke marijuana, drug test for marijuana, whatever, we're going to take away this, we're going to do this, we're going to terminate that, we're going to cut down your appointments, this, that, or I mean, literally just threats. No contract. And I actually, when I got that document, amazingly enough, it did actually happen. The doctor in the VA handed me that contract and wanted me to sign it to maintain my pain medication, to continue getting my pain medication. I was supposed to sign this. And I just, again, this came with a little tiny little smile. And I asked if I could take it and show my family attorney. I don't sign any contract. They actually called it a contract. I said, I can't, I just have a family thing. I mean, we do not sign any, I promised my dad, never sign a contract without showing it to the attorney. So I actually did it. I dutifully took this pain contract from the VA hospital. You should have seen the horror on the face of this nurse inside the VA hospital that had to give me this form. She went to the doctor and talked about it. It was a big discussion. They're like, oh yeah, I guess we could give him a copy of it to show his lawyer. We're asking him to sign it. It was really funny, very funny situation. So I took it to my attorney, and that was another funny situation. He had never seen anything like it in his life. He looked at it and he read it and he reviewed it and he said, it's not a contract. And he said, simply a contract is an agreement between 2 parties where you get something. You each get something. You're not getting anything. That's called a threat. That's not called a contract. You have to get something in return for what you're giving. That's a contract. Simple contract definition, evidently, simple contract law. Went back to the VA, and I told them that my family lawyer said I couldn't sign that. And that started a chain of events that took how many years? Was it 7 years?
Something like that.
7 years to resolve. I went through 50 or 60, 70, no, it was over 70. I think it was up into 80 different people in the chain of command. Picture that now. I sat across the desk from 80 different people in the Veterans Affairs Department over like 7 years. And at the end of that road, I met up with a guy named Marty Chilcutt. Marty Chilcutt is a veteran who was out in Colorado after Prop 215, and he saw what happened in California with the medical marijuana law there. And he said, oh, we could do that in Colorado. He just bravado of a well-accomplished military veteran and psychotherapist. He just called up the funders that funded Prop 215 out there in California and said, hey, I could do this in Colorado. Top down thing, we'll write an amendment to the Constitution, Colorado. We'll get these guys to write it and run it up the flagpole. We'll pay for the whole thing. You pay for the whole thing. I'll do it, get it whipped together like that. And they did. Evidently, they went for it, and he orchestrated this thing, which became Amendment 2, the medical marijuana program in Colorado, which is and stands as one of the only state medical marijuana programs that's a constitutional amendment, giving the right of those citizens to access cannabis as a basic right under their state constitution. He moved to Michigan, Kalamazoo, Michigan. And he's like, oh, I'm in Michigan. Let me start an initiative here. And he actually got rolling on it, an initiative. And Marijuana Policy Project came in. They wanted to do the initiative. And they had an idea. They had Bob Barr, who was former senator, who we helped get fired. Remember, Ron Krickenberger and the Libertarian Party went after him with Jim and Cheryl Miller. Cheryl Miller was a MS patient who looked right in the camera in Bob Barr's district and said, Bob Barr, and with that little voice of hers where she could barely speak, why are you trying to take away my medicine? And she's all crippled up from MS. It just crushed him. And out he went. He was the first time, I think, our cannabis movement ever took a sitting senator out of office with their efforts. And Ron Krickenberger with Libertarian Party were the mechanism of action of that. And as fate would have it, the twisted world we live in, Bob Barr then went on to work for the Marijuana Policy Project as an advisor. And one of the things that he advised the marijuana, I'll say it again, Bob Barr, after getting kicked out of Congress for being an anti-marijuana guy, went to work for the Marijuana Policy Project. And as their advisor, told them that they should work more with veterans. And that was advice that they ran with. And they went up to Marty and they said, okay, we got this advice to do some veteran stuff. Why don't you do a veterans thing and we'll fund that. And then we'll do the state initiative. It's a better, separation of duties, better assignment of tasks. And I actually agree with that, then and looking back. it was a big job, and Marijuana Policy Project did a pretty good job with Michigan's medical marijuana initiative. It passed, but they gave him a $5,000 grant to start Veterans for Medical Marijuana Access, our organization, Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access. Marty started it with sort of a marijuana policy project kind of way of doing things. He was trying to get veterans service organizations to sign on to a resolution supporting access to cannabis. He did that for a couple of years before he finally realized that he just wasn't getting anywhere. I mean, he couldn't even get these guys to talk to him, because every time he tried to talk to them, any high-ranking VSO or Veterans Affairs Department itself would just say, hey, marijuana is illegal. They throw up their hands, literally say marijuana is illegal. We can't talk about that. And as a result of that, he, basically was at wit's end about what to do to move forward. But he was having a really big impact in Michigan as a veteran's voice in that campaign. I mean, he started that initiative, rolling, and he started talking to the press, and he never stopped. And the entire time that Michigan Medical Marijuana Program initiative was rolling, he was talking to the press and stuff like that. So this is important. And the reason why I say all this is because when the initiative passed, the day it passed, the major media went right to the VA. And it was only because of Marty. If it wasn't for Marty pushing the whole time, the medical marijuana initiative, they never would have done that. And had the major media not gone to the VA, put them on the spot, put a big camera in their face, the big lights, we never would have got the quotes that we got from Detroit General Counsel of the VA and from the Veterans Affairs Department VISN leaders out in Detroit. And those comments were incredibly important. They connected to the work that I was doing inside the VA, which was on, this pain contract. It was all about marijuana, but I had managed to work on this for years without even saying the word marijuana. It was all about drug testing and not getting my pain medicine taken away for not signing this contract. I guess most veterans signed the contract and then tried to fight it, or got drug tested and then tried to fight it. Whatever. I wouldn't sign the contract and I wouldn't go away. And I think that made me a bit unique. And I wound up working with the ethics committee of the VA and the Veterans Affairs Pain Management Directorate. And right at the time that Marty was doing his thing, it hit. And being able to have what they said in Detroit helped us to formulate a question that we sent along to the General Counsel of VA. The General Counsel of VA is the one that passed the question. We thought it was a legal question, about this pain contracts, and it sure sounds legal. The undersecretary, the General Counsel, as they're called, of the VA, sent it over to the Undersecretary of Health. The Undersecretary of Health sent back a letter, and that letter became the proxy medical marijuana policy of the VA for a few weeks until we got the attention of the New York Times. They were working on a front page cover story about that letter, the letter to me from the VA, from the Undersecretary of Health. And the VA was like, wait a minute. We got this policy we've been working on. How about let us put out this policy and let that be the story, instead of by proxy making this letter from the Undersecretary of Health to this veteran be the policy. And the New York Times came to me and they're like, is that okay with you? And I was like, you're kidding? That's fantastic. I love it. I'll wait a week or two. No problem. And they're going to put out this, and they put out the policy, 2010. That was the VA policy. Marty's work, my work combined. Right about that time, I took over leadership of Veterans for Medical Marijuana Access, Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access. And I brought it to Al, and talked about it. We talked about it continuing on in the same way that Marty had been doing, and we didn't really have any corporate papers or anything to continue because we would have had to move the corporate home of it anyway. And we decided that, given the resources that we have, given the way that, we both understand the cannabis movement, it might be more effective to move forward as a voluntary effort and not be a funded effort, not have a bank account, not have paid employees, not have registration at the Internal Revenue Service. So that's what we did. We continued on. Al joined forces with me, and we continued on as a voluntary effort. And, to our credit, we now have instigated a nationwide change of medical marijuana policy to include and allow for post-traumatic stress to be a qualifying condition under these medical laws. We were instrumental in that, picked it up from just the one state in New Mexico and California. And when we were done, we had created a tidal wave of change that now virtually every modern medical marijuana program has that qualification, very much as a result of the many, many veterans that we work with across the country as a voluntary effort. And the way we do things is we'll work in a state basically when we're invited, and we will bring in resources from the entire movement as needed to support those in that local area to get the job done. And it's a very simple format, uses almost unlimited resources of our cannabis movement, our cannabis culture. So yeah, I'm really proud of everything that we've done and everything that we've gotten to be part of. And I didn't even mention, a little side project that we took on. I got a job from Jack Hare and Dennis Pro and all those guys back in 2007 to go to the United Nations in 1997, to go to the United Nations in 1998 and represent the cannabis movement. When I went to meet with them, honestly, I thought that they were going to tell me somebody else that was already doing this and I would just help them. I really didn't think I would be the leader, but there was nobody else. I wound up being the guy. And I went to the United Nations in 1998. We presented a table on the right to access medicine and being a basic human right inside the General Assembly Hall of the United Nations, and started 25, however many years of activism that led to two different things. The first 10 years or so led to a strong infrastructure that we built inside the United Nations to allow for our activism. So-called non-governmental organizations called NGOs, NGO committee in New York that we brought back to life. Back in the drug war days of the 1980s, had been active and it kind of went on a mothball. So we brought that back and reinvigorated that so it could help us work inside the United Nations. We had a huge summit that we were part of in 2008, where we created a resolution that's actually a United Nations NGO resolution. It's a unique thing on drug policy, and that's on file at the UN. You can find it on the shelves of the United Nations from 2008. And then 2009, we started working on cannabis policy, and were given a gift basically by Japan and Azerbaijan, who put forward a resolution to try to outlaw cannabis seeds, of all things, at the United Nations in 2009. That wound up 5 years later, finally creating a process to look into cannabis seeds is a big thing because hemp is exempt under the treaty. Japan, I guess, really didn't know what a Pandora's box they were opening, or maybe they did. But to look at something that wasn't even under the treaty, you'd have to look at cannabis issues wide. So that's what they did. The United Nations sent over a request to the World Health Organization to look at all aspects of cannabis and reassess the science base of cannabis and make a new assessment. And that's what they did. And ironically enough, at the end of 5 years, from 2015 to 2020, they never did come up with anything on seeds, but they did completely review cannabis and make some very bold recommendations and changes. Like, first of all, the World Health Organization now supports medical access to cannabis, where before they were against it. The World Health Organization now says that cannabis as a medicine is accepted as a medicine, that it provides relief no other medications can provide, and it does so within very well, accepted norms of side effects, of negative side effects. And that change was enshrined in law. It was accepted by the United Nations in the December session last year, 2020, to take cannabis out of the most dangerous drug list, to reschedule, quote unquote, reschedule cannabis at the international level, to accept its medical value and to mainstream it as a medicine. And that change in international law is working its way through the system. And from 2015 on, we've been working as veterans. We've been doing this as a veterans project. Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access took the lead with Foundation for Alternative Access to Addiction Treatment out of France, and working with, and again, drawing from resources from the entire movement. We worked at the World Health Organization, brought in 300, I think we brought in 300 NGOs or so to participate. That's not bad. I mean, we had moments, you can look back over those 5 years, we had moments where we brought to bear, I think, over 200 at one time inside the World Health Organization to get something done. we really did bring the resources to bear, and the hemp movement gets a merit badge, especially towards the end. CBD became a big subject of conversation, and the hemp movement, both the AHA, the European Industrial Hemp Association, the Hemp Industry Association from USA, Vote Hemp, all contributed and helped a great deal for the team to be able to participate in these meetings in Geneva, Switzerland, to get this World Health Organization review done and make sure that they had everything that we knew, and make sure that politics weren't going to override the evidence. Just an amazing journey, amazing time. And then I'll finish it off by saying that now, what, 3 days ago now, Virginia legalized cannabis. The governor refused to sign the bill that the legislature sent over because it didn't legalize it for 3 years. It wouldn't legalize cannabis until the stores were set up. So you wouldn't be able to have a stick of legal weed in 3 years. The governor sent it back and said, no, we want it, you got to be able to grow it in your yard in July, or I'm not signing it. And it was like a standoff for a minute. The Senate voted 20-20 tie on the governor's recommendation, and the chair had to come in and override the tie to allow Virginia to be the first southern state to legalize and set up adult regulated access to cannabis. So these are incredible days. I mean, I what I just said, Al, I can't even believe I just said it. I can't believe we've gotten this stuff done. I mean, what's your take on this? I mean, what are you feeling right now?
Well, you know, I know it's not over. I'm too much of a cynic to think that these guys are going to just walk away. I just put together in my head while you were talking, though, that, yeah, it was the WHO in 2020 that finally said, hey, this stuff's a medicine. And I'm thinking, yeah, you know, but at the same time, they were debating whether it was a medicine. 26 countries in the world had it in their pharmacopoeia. And you know, so that's why I'm a cynic, because here's this bureaucracy full of all these PhDs and MDs that just act like they're damn stupid. And it's been that way through the course of the thing. Your pain contract that screwed up tens of thousands of veterans, and it was bullshit. When we got done, when Mike didn't finish the story, but they sent VMCA the letter and said, yeah, this is wrong, we're going to change it. And then it was in July of 2010 that the VA under signature put out a directive that said, I can even quote it. There was a part of the letter or the directive said, cannabis is a medicine and you'll treat it that way, addressing the physicians and other healthcare professionals. And that it will be, you will pay attention to it, and you will make sure that that it gets integrated into the protocol correctly, and that the documentation is done, and that there is no penalties, et cetera, et cetera. Like I said, there's no loss of benefits. So let me bring up a couple of things that are left undone. See, Mike, and I know you know what I'm going to say. Well, that just sucks, what I just said. What did I just say? That the veterans can talk about cannabis with their doctors. They can have it integrated into their protocols if they're in legal states. I'll get to that in a minute. And isn't that wonderful? No, it sucks. Why isn't cannabis in the pharmacopoeia of the VA? Why is it in the pharmacy? Why do these men and women have to go out on the street and buy their own medicine? They shouldn't. They're veterans. They rate. I don't pay for my medicine. I'm 100% retired. I don't pay. So why are they paying? So that's wrong. Now, here's the thing that's really wrong. Mike mentioned a word when he was talking about the UN and working with the UN. One of the things that the NGOs and Patients Out of Time and VMCA was very much one of those NGOs. We're looking for equality. He used that word a couple of times with those people. Well, I'm looking for equality within my own country. I live in Florida. Florida has a legal medical cannabis law. It's getting better. And so I can go to my VA facility up in Tallahassee, And I can go in with my problem and I can sit there with my doctor and say, and by the way, I use cannabis every day for pain. And it also helps me with my post-traumatic stress. And the doc says, cool, man, how much do you use? And, yeah, is it good? I'm glad I was working for it. But if I go into, if I'm a veteran and I live in South Dakota, and I go in with the same problems to a VA facility and I sit there with my doctor and the guy says, I say, look, I use cannabis for these things. He says, young man, you're going to have to go off the ground. So we have to have you leave. Now you can come back in 30 days if you stop using cannabis and we can have a discussion about your health, but you can't use cannabis in the VA system in South Dakota. That sucks, right? I mean, there's no way that's good that a veteran in Florida can use cannabis in the VA system and a veteran in South Dakota can't. What the hell's that about? I call it, I want this to become very popular. I want you guys and girls out there to think about this. I call the VA system medical treatment by geography. Think about it. It's where you live, whether or not you can, as a military veteran, use cannabis in your medical protocol. Where you live. Well, that's, I'm going to start off with the right word. That's a stupid policy. It's also immoral. It's unequal. And it's medically unethical. It's the policy of your government about the treatment of not only veterans, wounded veterans. This is how you treat us. Yeah, you out there. Because if you don't know this, you should. And while you know it, you should be outraged. Outraged that your neighbor down the street who's wounded, doesn't have a leg or he's got TBI or some problem like that, can't use cannabis in his protocol and go to his VA hospital and be treated with dignity and honor. There's something wrong with this system, guys. So, yeah, Mike, it isn't over. It isn't over. And so I don't want any veteran out there to think that it is. Mike has just told you that we have gathered together just by, osmosis almost, thousands of guys and girls out there that are veterans that have helped all over this country to push this forward. I want you to help us. I want you to get on. This is on YouTube. I want you to understand what I just said. That military veterans in this country, as far as medical cannabis goes, are treated by where they live. Anybody think that's a policy that we should be proud of? You don't belong in my country. So anyway, this is the kind of discussions that Mike and I are going to have, except we're not going to do this and talk to each other like we've just done today. But this was what we call our baseline program to sort of set listeners up to what's going on. And what we'll be coming to do every 2 weeks at this time, 10 a.m. East Coast time, will be to discuss on Veterans Voices more specific issues. There'll be interviews with veterans, their caregivers, their friends, family, kids, whatever, to talk about the cannabis issue, how it positively or negatively affects them, depending on their story. We incorporate all veterans. We are a veteran is a veteran is a veteran. If you're a civilian out there, you might not get it, but trust us, everybody's the same in our world. And so you'll hear from Coast Guard people, and you'll hear from people in the Merchant Marine, and you'll hear people in the Army. You'll talk to men and women, old and young, different conflicts. But if I could interview with Mike a legionnaire from Roman army, that sucker tell you the same thing that I will about war and peace and trying to get it all together after the shit's gone down. It hasn't changed, gang, over the years. It won't. But we right now believe we have at least, a little bit of hope that the use of cannabis more and more integrated into the not only the lives of veterans, but also other folks, just for all people, anybody that's experienced trauma, athletes. I work for a group called Athletes for Care. We'll go off on that someday. But these guys are in the same boat as the military veterans. They get hit in the head a lot. In the military, you get hit in the head a lot. And then when you get hit like that, it screws your brain up physically, moves things around and stuff. So, you know, what we found is that the use of cannabis reduces the inflammation in the brain immediately when that hurt occurs. And this stuff we'll talk about with the Israeli army and the Canadian army, Czechoslovakian army, how they use cannabis for their wounded soldiers on the battlefield, right there where the trauma occurs. There's all kinds of information that are going to come from us, and it's all going to be real. Mike and I don't talk about, well, maybe this or maybe that. We'll tell you about the science. If you want a reference, we'll try and get it to you. We're also just going to try and have a message system. So when we get talking here, you can type in a quick little text or a question, or maybe we screwed up how we explained something and you needed it a little different. So that we can interface a little bit. Certainly send us texts in between and we'll try to answer those questions in the next show. We'll work it all out. But anyway, this is for veterans. It's all about you. But we want you to let your loved ones, your caregivers, your friends, your acquaintances know that we're here because they too have somebody that they know has been in the military that's a veteran, or they have a grandfather that was, or there's an interest there. And the more people that know about the unethical medical treatment system in the VA, for instance, the better off we are. The more people that know that the WHO and the UN are now on the side of patients and against the policies of the US government, we're all better off. And the quicker we do this, in my mind, when I get up every day, honestly, I get up and I think, you know, how many did we lose to suicide yesterday? The official number is not official. The VA put out, everybody talks about 22. Well, none of us believe it. None of us that are in this world believe it. Maybe 4 times that amount, I don't know, 3 times that amount, but it isn't 22. When a vet dies of overdose, that's not a suicide. When he runs into a bridge at 100 miles an hour at 2 o'clock in the morning, that's not a suicide. So we know this, and you vets out there, you listen to me. Cannabis can help you overcome suicide thoughts. It's not perfect. You need help. You need to come to other vets, et cetera, but it can help you. And you should go that way right now if you have access to cannabis. Don't let anybody tell you it won't help you. And if you get help, tell other vets. If you're a vet and you know a lady that needs some help, go find her, help her, give her cannabis. Many of the veteran prescribed drugs for post-traumatic stress, anxiety, depression, et cetera, pick your problem, have on the label, it says, watch out. This drug may give you suicidal ideation. Suicidal ideation, that's a medical term, like it might get you thinking about blowing your head off. So be careful about taking this drug when you're already thinking about blowing your head off. The whole thing is crazy. Cannabis does not have a suicidal ideation label. And I highly recommend the VA listening to me give that some consideration. So anyway, every couple of weeks, Mike, what do you think? Are we done today?
Almost. Yeah. I wanted to just give a quick overview of kind of what we're doing and who we're doing it with, and then we'll sign off. So I wrote a note, so I'd say it quickly, but you pointed out, Al, very clearly the need and the problem. What's the solution? So what Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access is doing, basically we have like a 4-prong approach. The first prong is research and development, you could call it. And what the goal there is to get cannabis into the pharmacy at the VA. We recognize that the schedule number of cannabis is a big problem, prevents even the industry that's producing these great cannabis medicines that are in dispensaries in states where it's legal now from even getting in the pipeline and getting those same products in a pharmacy, proper pharmacy access to these drugs. The minute you leave the state line with those dispensary items, they become illegal federal drugs, no exemption because of the federal prohibition. So ending federal prohibition, rescheduling at the federal level becomes a priority. When you start looking into changing the law at the federal level, you realize our connected nature of our US federal law. The Controlled Substances Act, federal law of the United States, was written in a way in 1971 to implement the Drug Control Treaty that we had signed into in 1961. So the treaty becomes an issue because you can't really do national change within the structure of the treaty as it was written. We went and changed the treaty. That, if you want to know why we went to the treaty body, we went to the international level, it was so that we could get above the problem that we were dealing with at the DEA. And I think we've actually successfully done that. We'll see what happens in the next 6 months or so, but we might actually have successfully untied the Gordian knot of rescheduling cannabis after what, 47 years, 50 years or so of trying in the cannabis movement. It took going to Vienna and Geneva to pull that off. But we also work with veterans across the country and, you know, entities like MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, Dr. Sue Sisley, others that are doing research with the intention of putting cannabis into the pipeline of the new drug application process, new drug development process, with the goal of getting cannabis approved as a medicine to be put on pharmacy shelves. Once it's on a pharmacy shelf, every veteran has access to it. It'll have normal access through the pharmacy. You won't have to have these conversations anymore. But until then, what can we do? Well, we thought a voucher would be a good idea. A veteran can get a voucher, you know, the way they do for offsite care. If you've ever had to get something like a bone scan, I had to have one time. VA didn't have a bone scan machine. They sent me downtown to have a bone scan. Sometimes dental work, sometimes, you know, eye exams. You know, it's hard to say. Sometimes local VA hospitals don't have the resources. They have the capability under law to send you downtown to a outside the VA to get that care. And we want to use that capability, use those funds to create vouchers for veterans to take into the local community and pay for their recommendations and their cannabis access at the state level for now. Embarrass the VA to give us access to international sources. Now, the VA can't put cannabis in the pharmacy, and they can't give us cannabis that's legal under state law. Again, the minute it crosses state lines, it's illegal. Federal government can't break the federal law, not so blatantly. But other countries have legalized cannabis and put it in the pharmacy, like our neighbors in Canada. They have cannabis in the pharmacy right now, and veterans are getting that cannabis through their Veterans Fair program. That is certainly above board and legitimate, and a source that the VA could use for, let's call it, some research and development inside the United States within the VA system of how they could distribute cannabis and how they could best take advantage of cannabis, trying to use it, you know, maybe for some of the cases that are most in need of such access for now. And that would be something that they could do at the national level. They could do that in all VA hospitals across the entire United States, albeit it would be a small measure. I would think at first, at least a pilot project that would at least have the capability of providing every veteran in the entire VA system access to cannabis as a medicine, albeit through the pharmacy shelves of Uruguay, Mexico, Canada, Netherlands, Israel, etc. And the US government should be very embarrassed if the Israel veteran and the Netherlands veteran and the Canadian veteran and Mexican veteran, Uruguay veteran all have access to cannabis as a medicine legally, and we don't. That's a really embarrassing. And then finally, free speech. You know, we went after the free speech of the doctor. That was what we went after in 2007, 2008. You know, Marty and I talked about that and came to the conclusion that, you know, the doctor's free speech was interesting point of view, because the recommending of cannabis, this use of cannabis under state laws, is done under the recommending of cannabis, not a prescription for cannabis. And that's a big distinction that's made in a court case. If you look at this court case in the West Coast, Ninth Circuit, called Conant versus McCaffrey. It was renamed later Conant versus Walters because McCaffrey was a drug czar. He was replaced by drug czar Walters. Conant was a doctor. Dr. Conant sued Walters for you know, the ability to recommend cannabis without interference from the federal government on the argument, two arguments. One, the acceptance that a prescription would not be allowed. And this is not a prescription. that a prescription is a prescription pad with the DEA license on it. And this is a piece of paper that is doctors just expressing their point of view as part of that communication between the doctor-patient relationship. And that is protected free speech under the Constitution and necessary free speech for the doctor-patient relationship. That was the argument that was made in Conant. That was the argument that was accepted by the Ninth Circuit. And that was the case that allowed for 36 states now to have modern medical cannabis access laws. That is the backbone. That is the thing that allows for 36 states to have medical cannabis access laws. Is that thing that I just described, that case, that fact, that reality, that recommendation. And the doctors in the VA, by that same policy, were told that they can't recommend cannabis. And yet all along, the VA has been going to Congress and everywhere else saying, no, doctors have the ability to speak freely about this with their patient. They can speak freely about cannabis, talk about it. But we just made that whole big argument from Conant that the recommendation itself, the piece of paper itself, is part of that free speech. So we are being not afforded our doctor-patient relationship. They are violating their oath as a doctor. They are violating their standards of medical care that they are subscribed to as a doctor. Their doctor's license or medical license, even though they're a federal contract, a federal government employee, they still have to have a state-issued medical license. They are in breach of that medical license, and they are no longer protected by that medical license because they are no longer engaged in the level of free speech that Conant argued was necessary to the doctor-patient relationship. And, even though as federal government employees, they don't have free speech necessarily, they have to have enough free speech to conduct themselves as doctors. Otherwise, they need to shut that shit down. And that's where we're at. I mean, that's how serious our claims are. And then the other side of the desk, the other side of the patient consult desk is the patient, the veteran, who doesn't work for the federal government, is free from the federal government and has full constitutional rights to free speech. Their free speech, our free speech, your free speech, my free speech is being completely, what's the word? Violated. It's being, free speech is being violated because we are not able to freely talk to the doctor if we can't get that piece of paper, if we can't get that recommendation from that doctor, if their doctor is not allowed to conduct themselves according to VA policy in a way that involves the necessary free speech to conduct doctor-patient relationships. They're acting unethically, they're outside of their license, and our free speech is being violated, our constitutional rights are being violated. All that is what we're looking at as part of our legal portfolio. And I'll tell you now, I've been sitting on this, we've been sitting on this for a long time, and we've been working through we had 7 bills in Congress that tried to change the doctor side of the equation, tried to give the doctor that right to recommend, try to, recognizing this fault, trying to fix it, God bless them. But they have only been looking at the tip of the iceberg, a piece of that we gave them purposefully as talking points, and all the rest is totally unused weaponry that we have in our legal arsenal, and we intend to use it. We intend to move forward. The United States government has run out of time. They have now to do things they don't have yesterday, and tomorrow is this. Tomorrow is court. Tomorrow is we win and they're embarrassed. We win and they're embarrassed. We win and they're embarrassed. And I'd rather them work with us and we all win and they're not embarrassed. I really do. That's always been our goal, is to work with the VA. The Veterans Affairs Department has been our friend, our ally, and our champion, and we've been theirs. And we've been working at this side by side, arm in arm, for the benefit of the veteran. And I think it's shown. But the veterans that we're working with across the country, you express it so well, have just run out of patience. And we're dying, and we're not going to take it anymore. And anyway, the last thing I'll say, I want to put a shout out to our friends out there in the veterans community. The stakeholder group has grown a little bit since 2010. At last count, we have like 35 veterans organizations that are in one facet or another part of this stakeholder group that was, allowed to be able to express itself after this VA policy. We were able to talk to veterans service organization leaders. We've been able to talk to the VA. We've been able to go to Congress. That's all because of that VA policy. It opened up the door to these communications. And now we have this thing that we just created recently, Veterans Action Council. And it's, a really beautiful thing that kind of grew out of COVID and buddy checks and stuff. And it's a totally independent body of independent individuals working as a coalition, doesn't do anything without full consensus. It kind of reminds me of an old round table, where everybody has their say and nothing gets done unless everybody's in agreement, and somebody might die in the middle of that table. But at the end of the day, we'll get the shit done. That's the kind of meetings we have every week. Veterans are certainly welcome to join the Veterans Action Council, and every veteran has a seat. Every veteran service organization has a seat. Any veteran that wants to come in has a seat at the council. We're all equals on the council. So I'm really excited about that, and it's been a lot of fun to work with them. We created a letter that we submitted for this process of the United Nations meetings that are occurring next week. As we're meeting now, it's to be the 12th through the 16th of April 2021. This is really exciting times, and we are, these abstract things that we were working on, at the state level, at the federal level, at the international level, are all coming together now, and there is no separation anymore. And that's just, I find it a really exciting time, and for once, maybe we'll finally get some of these things answered. Al's been asking the same damn question for 8 years now. Maybe we'll finally get him an answer. Where's the data? What is the Veterans Affairs Department of Veterans Affairs done with the data about all these veterans that are using cannabis under medical state laws? They should have quite a bit of information somewhere inside their machinery, and we have yet to really have full engagement on that. Although we're getting closer, Al. We're getting closer. These guys and gals, veterans that are working on research, are getting closer and closer to getting into those databases of the VA and working with the right people at the VA to push the right buttons to figure this shit out. I'll just close with this. The Veteran Affairs Department looks at things through the eyes of their psychiatrists. They look through the eyes of the National Institutes of Drug Abuse. They collect data on, marijuana as a poly-drug abuse, a substance abuse problem. And it's going to be a little bit of a retool for them to see things our way and to understand what we're looking at. But a lot of the data is already in their machines, and they're just pushing a different button and looking at it a different way. I'll recall you to a document I read a few years back, and they were looking at abuse of cannabis, but they noticed that amongst those who were abusing cannabis, there was a pretty high number that had reported lower symptoms of things like the symptoms of post-traumatic stress, for example. And that's kind of how they're learning. It's like they're looking at cannabis as a drug of abuse, but nonetheless, they're still seeing some of the truths that we're experiencing. It's undeniable truths when someone is able to put aside opiates, have a better response. These are good things.
Let me just sum up before I say goodbye, but to piggyback on Mike, what he just said to you is recalling what I said. The directive that was put out by the VA in 2010, in July 2010, also included instructions within the VA to gather data from the patients using cannabis within the VA system in their facilities, that it should be written down. What happened? Well, what happened? I mean, we're coming up on way over 10 and a half years, July, we're coming up on 11 years where tens and tens and tens of thousands of military men and women have been treated in VA facilities that have used cannabis in their therapeutic protocol. What happened? What happened? Obviously nothing bad happened, because if one vet got an axe and killed his mother, we would have heard about it. So my bet is the only thing that could have happened for tens and tens and tens and thousands of veterans using cannabis within the federal VA system, which is part of the executive branch of the federal government, by the way, is that nothing happened. And then let me just leave you with this thought, veterans or civilians listening to our conversation, and I hope you come back in a couple of weeks because we'll try to do better. But these laws that we're talking about medical cannabis, medicinal cannabis, therapeutic cannabis, are made by lawyers and cops. They know a damn thing about medical cannabis, nothing. And they're the ones that got these laws going that says the doctors and the nurses and the nurse practitioners and the PAs and the veterinarians for your dog can't use cannabis because they know, they went to law school and they know this shit. So keep in mind, I always have this saying, it centers me sometimes when I have to deal with all this BS. Consider the source. Consider the source of your information. Do you really want to get your medical opinions from a lawyer or a cop? Do you? I don't. But that's the situation vets have right now. It must change. And I just leave you, Canada up there and the vets they get their military, they get hurt, they get their cannabis from their medical system in Canada. You know how they get it? You know how they get it? They get it by UPS or FedEx. They deliver it to their door. I can't even get it from my brothers and sisters in South Dakota. Thanks for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. You guys take care.
Let me see here. I believe we're no longer live, but we're still recording.
It says it's recording, Mike.
Yeah, so I'm gonna stop the recording.